The way I run companies, it's basically the same. It's the culture that you create and then the service you provide. You could interchange those services, and I think that's why some of these people from these higher education systems are saying, so I don't necessarily need to go turn a wrench, but I love the fact of running the company.
Today on the Curious Builder podcast, we had Ken Rusk on, and what a delight. An author, 40-year veteran, ditch digger. This is filled with tons of information, very inspiring. If you know anyone that is looking to own a business, anyone who's in middle school, high school, looking for a change of pace, this episode is for you. You're going to learn so much about what it is from blue collar to white collar to just, how about you just have a collar and be inspired, be passionate, find out what's out there. Without further ado, here's Ken Rusk. Welcome to the Curious Builder podcast. I'm Mark Williams, your host. Today, I am joined with Ken Rusk from Rusk Industries and the author of the Blue Collar Cash Book, which is very interesting. We'll spend most of our time talking a little bit about that, but you're a 40-year veteran from Rusk Industries. So welcome to the show. Maybe just give us a little background on who you are and where you find yourself in the world today.
Thanks, Mark, for having me. I really appreciate it. It's interesting because I've been accused of being a blue-collar entrepreneur, which could mean a lot of different things.
Accused sounds a little harsh. I think maybe complimented. It would be a better word than accused.
Yeah, it depends on what side of the aisle you're looking at from a stigma standpoint when it comes to these things. But yeah, it was a simple process. I like anybody else, had a bunch of part-time jobs when I was 12, 13, 14 years old. And my high school shared a fence with an industrial park, and we used to cut through the hole in that fence after school to go hang out to carry out. And going through that industrial park was always an interesting thing because there was all these businesses that were hustling and bustling, grown up Tonka toys running all around. And I thought to myself, I needed my first full-time job. I wanted to buy my first used car. And so I inquired one of these businesses, and what do you do? They said, we dig ditches. I said, I'm qualified for that. Let me rock and roll here. So I literally got started running shovels and jackhammers for a couple, 3 years in the summertime. And in the wintertime, I'd work in the office while I was still in high school. At the end of that time, it was either college or whatever. And they came to me and they said, listen, we're opening up franchises around the Midwest. You've seen the front and the back of the office. So why don't you help us do that? And so I literally lived out of a suitcase in Columbus and Cincinnati, Chicago, and Pittsburgh. And that was 3 or 4 years. And then finally, I just got tired of living out of a suitcase. So in 1986, I moved to Toledo, opened up my own foundation company with 6 people, and we have nearly 200 today. So it's been a hell of a ride.
Whoa, I'll say 200. Wow. We had someone on a week or two ago, Danny Spears, and it didn't take long to top his number. He has 100 employees. You have 200. That's no joke. All from digging a ditch at 15. I bet you had some solid blisters the first couple of weeks, but that's to be expected.
Yeah, I still have PTSD from all the vibrating jackhammers. That's just something that you never forget when you're riding one of those out there.
Tell me if you can relate to this. So we had a cabin out in Montana, and it's a lot rockier. I'm in Minnesota, and so the soil's great here. That's why they grow everything. But same with Iowa for all the corn. But anyway, Montana, a lot of rocks. So I remember I was actually a penance. So I was in trouble, and my dad was so mad at me. He said, I want you to dig a hole that's 4 feet wide and 4 feet deep. Here's the shovel, go. And I couldn't dig it. It was just rock. I think he knew that. I was a teenager at the time. And I remember I didn't try this on purpose, but in hindsight, it was a genius move. I broke the shovel in half because I was trying to pry it instead of digging around the rock, and it just snapped it. But then there was no more shovel, so I actually didn't have to complete the job because the shovel was broken. So fortuitous accident to avoid
solving problems. Yeah.
Oh man, I forgot about that story. We could talk the whole thing about Rusk Industries, and we certainly can. I think what's really interesting about your story is I love books. I devour audiobooks. I devour podcasts, and I'd love to hear the journey. I mean, we'll talk specifically maybe at the beginning about the book, what it is. You've got courses. People can understand that there's other paths. The main point of this is to educate people, in my opinion, but we can go where you want with it. But a big part of it too is I think a lot of people have this idea that, I'd like to write a book. I should just speak for myself. I'd like to write a book. I don't know what the why is for me. And I don't know personally, what am I going to share? Why am I going to share? But I just, everyone that I really respect and a lot of people that I find inspiration in, it's like they write a book. And I feel like there's something in the process that must give back to their author as well. So I'd love to hear not only like when you decided you like your process, like you didn't start Rusk Industries to be an author, but you became one for a reason. I'd love to get to the why and the how and what
Yeah,
you've learned. And so somewhere through these questions, you can think a little bit about that. But let's start
sure.
with the book itself, the Blue Collar Cash. It's a great, catchy title. I suspect I know what it's about. I haven't read it. Why don't you tell us a little bit about how it became to be and tell us what it's about?
Yeah, so I never woke up and said, okay, today I'm going to be an author. I'm not going to say it happened by accident, because I always thought that I wanted to tell the story of coming from 15 to now and how that all worked. And there was a specific thing that kept showing up with that. My daughter, unfortunately, had cancer when she was 12. And it was a pretty scary 5 years for her mother and I, and for her as well. And when you're sitting in oncology rooms in doctor's offices, and you're sitting in ultrasound rooms and all that, you have a lot of time to think, unfortunately. So I thought to myself, if I was going to write her a very long letter, what would I write her about what's important in life? She's going to have some disabilities from this thing. And what should she really be focused on? What should she really be chasing? What's the ultimate prize in life? And it's funny, Mark, because the words comfort, peace, and freedom, they kept showing up like red Volkswagens. One, you see a million of them. And I couldn't get rid of these three words, and they kept triangulating as though they were dependent on each other. And so I started writing a very long letter to her about you should be chasing comfort, peace, and freedom, whatever form that takes. We're not all going to chase rap star careers or influencers or sports figures. We're not all going to want mansions and 15 cars and mega yachts. Everyone seeks their own level of their perfect nirvana, their personal nirvana. And so, what is that, and how can you define it? And then, how can you go about chasing it? And through that letter, I started citing friends of mine who overcame, Mark, the most unbelievably horrible situations to become really awesome blue collar entrepreneurs, really successful people. And there was 4 or 5 of them. I could have written 10 of them, but I only had room for so many. And that, telling their stories, along with telling Nicole's story, along with telling my own story, it just melded into this self-help, this is how you should look at life kind of thing. And I know I had 10 legal pads full of ink. I hand wrote the book with a pen, many pens.
Did you really? Wow.
Um, yeah, every time I would type, I would just go blank. I'd type 5 words and I'd misspell 3 or 4 of them because I'm a terrible typer. So I was literally on a plane one day, and the guy said to me, I'm shaking my hand like this, and he's going, what's the matter? What are you doing? And I said, I think I'm writing a book. He goes, no, I get that, but you're writing it. Why aren't you typing it? I said, because I can't do that. That stack of legal pads, I literally just Googled editors in New York, and I found an editor there that had a whole stable full of ghostwriters that could help me clean this thing up. And they were interested in it. And then it went to social media. Then it went to, they found me an agent. And then that went to a book proposal. And then it went to a bidding war amongst 6 different publishers, which was crazy.
Wow.
And yeah, I landed at HarperCollins, which is one of the big guys. And then it just went nuts from there. It just took off and became a bestseller a year or two ago. And again, eternally blessed, very grateful, very humble, pretty cool experience.
That does sound pretty amazing. So it's been what, 3 years?
Yeah, it'll be 4 years in the fall, I think. Yeah,
Does it have a audio version or no?
it does. Yeah, I have an audio version. I have a audio book. There's a Kindle version. There's a CD. Believe it or not, there's still a CD out there. But yeah.
Yeah, no, that's really fascinating. I'm always interested in the why, because I feel like I saw something the other day about when you sell something. And what's cool about your why is it didn't start with you were trying to sell it. It seems like you backed into that. It's the why it was a letter to your daughter. And I think I actually, now I'm going to have to read the book or listen to it when I'm running here this summer. But I just love that concept so I feel like, and this will dovetail into some of the messaging, I'm sure, like, one of the things that I seek to do on even this podcast is I want listeners to get 2 to 3 business ideas out of it that they can apply to their business.
Sure.
Because most people, not all, but most, seem to get into whatever their career is, especially if they're an entrepreneur, through passion, something that they like to do. Like most builders became a builder not to run a business. They became a builder because they like building. Most, if you're an HVAC or a pipe fitter or whatever, like you were either good at it, you got skilled at it, but like this Venn diagram of 2 circles like lining up here, that you would be both great at business and also great at another thing, is just really unlikely. Even if you go to college and you become a doctor, like the idea that you're a doctor, but also good, you're going to be an entrepreneur at the same time, that is just so rare. And yet, why is it so many entrepreneurs, we all struggle with business literacy, and there's always room to improve there. And then I think that's also why you see a lot of very successful people. I think it's happening more and more now with how many people are retiring. I think we're seeing, I just read an article maybe 3 months ago about Harvard and MIT grads saying, okay, I can go to Wall Street and work 100 hours a week for 5 years to get my chops and whatever, or I could buy a plumbing company or an electric company. It's an instant cash machine. And I could just own this business and I could put all my time in this and instantly make money. And there's this huge youth movement, which I'm really excited about. But it's just interesting that they are coming from a business background, and we'll see, versus coming it from the passion of starting the company, which I don't think you always have to start a company to own a company. I think one of the things I wish that someone had told me 20 years ago when I was 23 starting a company is you could actually buy a company. You don't have to start one. I don't know why we always think we have to start everything, or maybe that's just a classic entrepreneur story, but I don't know. What's your thoughts on that?
You hit it on the head. So right now, there seems to be this movement towards control. And what I mean by that is, the secret is out on the blue collar side that when you're doing a job and working with your hands or doing something for yourself, you control a lot of things, Mark. You control your input, your output, the quality of that output. You control your day, your time, your schedule. You control your financial gain. And you don't always get that on the 15th floor of some cubicle of some auction house or whatever you're talking about there, some big multi-nation corporation. And you wonder, how do I fit in here? So the ability to control a lot of who you are and how you work is getting discovered by that side, the white collar side of our universe. And you're right. I have 5 or 6 friends right now that want to sell their businesses that can't sell them, and they're making bunches of money, and they can't find anyone that wants to buy those businesses because there's the stigma, or the past 10 or 20 years, there's been this stigma applied, and it's mainly generated by colleges, that if you don't send your kid to college, he'll never or she'll never amount to anything, which has never been true, but somehow they've convinced parents that it is, even high schools. I relish in that because I think of, like anything, if everyone's moving in this direction, the herd mentality, if you will, then maybe if you want to be different, unique, and special, you go over here, and maybe you go the opposite direction. And so that's what's so nice about contrarian thinkers in this particular example, because where in the blue collar side, where supply is low and demand is high, that's where the money goes. So you have less and less kids organically going into these professions through the high school path like they used to through shop class or whatever. That creates the demand. And there's this hole. For every 10 electricians retiring today, only 5 are coming online. So what does that tell you?
Is that true? Is that true for HVAC and plumbing? I've heard a number of different stats that are very similar. Is that true for the mechanicals in general, or that one specific?
It's all over the map. It may not be that severe in HVAC, but like plumbing, carpenters, welders, it's all that. And when you see that, you can say, I'm either going to follow what the society expects me to do, which is follow the herd through some college path, or I can say, I'm either going to go work for a guy and then learn his company and then go start my own, or I'm going to work for a guy, retire him, and buy his company. And there's this awakening now that's happening where people are going, wow, maybe that is the path, because the actual skill itself is interchangeable. And I got to be careful when I say that, because I'm respecting all the trades when I say this, but in my case, I run a ditch digging company. I was a ditch digger, so I get it. I love those guys. I still am one. But I could almost replace ditch digging with selling windows or selling roofing or welding or carpentry and have the same framework. You follow me? Mm-hmm. So running the company is, in the way I run companies, it's basically the same. It's the culture that you create and then the service you provide. You could interchange those services. And I think that's why some of these people from these higher education systems are saying, so I don't necessarily need to go turn a wrench, but I love the fact of running the company. And so I think that's why some of that stuff is happening.
There's a lot to touch on. One of them I'd maybe start at the top is, and it's a great name because everyone knows what you mean by blue collar. What's interesting, and I've mentioned this a number of times on the podcast, but I'd be curious to go back. I actually have not done research on this. I don't know if it came up in your book research at all, but like the term white collar and blue collar? Like, where did it start? I know what it means, but did you ever look into that? Like,
Yeah,
where? Well,
absolutely.
I would love to hear this.
So way back in the day, if you were an educated person, or if you worked in the office, or if you were a lawyer or a teacher or a doctor or whatever, you had these really tall, starchy white plastic, not plastic, but like really stiff collars. And you would put them on your suit and you could interchange them. You could switch them to any suit you had. It was
Oh,
a
really?
collar
So it
that,
wasn't like it wasn't the collar was not integrated like they are on a
no,
normal
it
shirt.
was a collar you could, it had 4 or 5 black buttons and you could interchange it with any type of dress that you had. And so you were seen as a high hat wearing, cane using, glove wearing.
Was this
Over,
what year are we talking? 1800s, 1700s, 19?
yeah,
Like,
yeah. I
when was
mean,
this happening?
yeah, you're talking 1800s and through
Okay.
like the 20s.
Okay.
Okay. So people would walk around and they would recognize them as, oh, that's a professional person. Now, conversely, if you were a guy working in the ditches, you wore jeans and you wore jean shirts. So you had a blue collar, you had dungarees, or you had the original Levi of company and that kind of thing. You wore blue collars because it was a blue jean shirt. And that was your uniform. So you were considered blue collar. And that's how that happened. So the interesting thing is, though, the stigma started way back then. Well, he's just a ditch digger and I'm this white collar wearer. You know what I mean? But what happens is over the years, as these jobs got more sophisticated, and I'll remind you that of the 167 million people in the US today considered full employment, 77 million of those people still work with their hands in some way, shape, or form. So almost half of us are still in that mode. This whole into the past the 80s, it got really bad where colleges were saying, you either come to us or you're going to be flipping burgers the rest of your life. And they were selling people on that notion, which was not true, but it was working. And they started convincing parents that, hey, if your kid doesn't have a degree, you're not a good parent. You haven't finished kicking that bird out of the nest yet. They were convincing high schools and guidance counselors. They were actually monetizing high schools for sending them people.
Tell me more about that. What are we talking about here?
There were schools that were getting grants or they were getting funds based on how many people they pushed through college and then how many scholarships they got.
This episode is brought to you by Pella Northland. For 20 years, I've been using Pella windows, and I couldn't be happier to call them as a business partner, a trade partner, and someone that really supports us in our quality builds. You know, we use wood windows and doors on every single one of our homes, and 98% of every home that I've ever built has been a Pella window. I've gotten to know their team here locally as well as nationally, and the way that they support us as a craftsman, as well as they support our homeowners with their lifelong guarantee, has actually been a game changer for me. So when people ask me who I use, I recommend Pella. If you want to hear more about Pella's story, you can listen to episode 1, where I interview Peter and Ed from Pella Northland about their journey into the Pella ownership. This episode is brought to you by Adaptive. For over 2 years now, I've been using Adaptive. It's an incredible game changer. It's AI technology based. It helps you with bill pay. And as a builder, there's very few things that anger our subs more than not being paid on time. Well, those days are gone. Not only do you know exactly where you are, but you can pay people through your ACH channels, making draws extremely quick. With one click of a button, which used to take hours, my office staff is now able to generate a draw to the bank or to the client in literally seconds. The thing that I appreciate the most about Adaptive is their ability to keep changing. We've given them 3 or 4 feedbacks on the things that we need as builders, and within just a few months, they're rolling those things out. This is saving us hours per week and days per month in terms of our efficiency. If you're looking to upgrade your business, I'd highly recommend Adaptive. You can reach out to them at adaptive.com or listen to the Curious Builder podcast, episode 15 or episode 80, where we dive into their origin story. I get that a college, let's say it's a private institution, or even if it's public, I guess they're obviously trying to get enrollment. At what point has there ever been like a federal mandate, or obviously we have a high school curriculum at some sort of national and state level? And I'm a child of the 80s, so graduated in 99. So all these things are very true. Like we can talk about shop class and all that kind of stuff in a little bit. But was it actually like, I understand lobbyists and all that. So if you're private, I get it. Like you're trying to attract business. I don't have an issue with that, but I understand like the fallout of that is pretty massive. But
Sure.
was that even higher up, like on a federal level? Was there ever like a federal push where that they got help on a federal level as well? Or was it mostly a state by state, college by
I think
college
that
kind of thing?
I think two things. I think at one point we were really looking for engineers bad, and so they were trying to really push people into engineering school, and that still is something that we're looking for. Even
Right.
Elon Musk talks about that. But I did a speech one time in Columbus for a bunch of guidance counselors, and by the way, you're not allowed to call them guidance counselors anymore because that's like a negative connotation. So
What do you call them?
you had to call them school counselors. So when I heard that, the first thing I did is I stood in front of these 50 people and I said, I'm so happy to be here in front of all you guidance counselors today. And they all started laughing. Oh, you can't say that anymore. I go, I know, I heard, I can't say that anymore. As if that's some kind of stigma, because if you need guidance, then you're less than a normal kid, which is so stupid. But anyways, do you know that afterwards I had a book signing? 47 of the 50 people who had other classes to attend throughout this whole the convention, they stayed behind so they could get a copy of my book signed. But that's not the story. The story was 3/4 of them said to me, hey, you got to keep talking about this and you got to talk about it as loudly as you can because our schools are telling us we have to push kids into college. And we know some of these kids would be better off as carpenters or plumbers or electricians or bakers or hairdressers or estheticians or nail techs. And we can't say that. We have to say go to college. So please keep talking because you're helping save some of these kids from debt and problematic
What
futures by getting degrees they can't use or don't want.
what's
So it was pretty eye-opening for me to have that happen.
What's cool about that, and I was listening to a podcast that you did recently with a pipe fitter, and I know you're a big proponent and fan of teachers. They have a very difficult job. And so it's not that we're
Sure.
talking. So I like to hear that these educators, these not guidance counselors, are wanting that. What's interesting is the parents' role in all of this. And I had an interaction recently with a good friend of mine and his wife, and very close friends actually. And their son has horses, has all the stereotypes of working with his hands, and he's just great. I've had him on a number of my job sites cleaning up, and just the stuff that I did when I was a kid on my dad's job sites, and just whatever. Just he's interested. Wants to get out. It's hard to find guys. It used to be back in the 80s and 90s. My dad would get a truck pull up after wrestling practice, and wrestlers and cross country runners were the best. He said the best high school workers, because wrestlers, they had really good work ethic, and he's no cross country runner who's going to run 40 miles a week is going to shirk your responsibility. And so they made
Right.
good little helpers. But anyway, where I'm going with this is he was taught. I said, hey, so and so, in his Gage. I said, Gage, where are you thinking about going? And or what do you want to do? Do you want to? Because he had expressed to me like, hey, I love building. I love what I've seen. I'm like, of course, I'm the podcast. I'm interviewing people all the time. Yeah, there's a great line, and I feel this big sharp kick under the table. And I am not a subtle person. Like I'm like. I look across the table. Did you just kick me? His mom kicked me. And and I was like, I wasn't going to shut up. I understood that was her. I understood what she wanted me to do, which was to shut up, but I wasn't going to do it. And I said right in front of her son, it was pretty clear. I'm like, I'm not disrespecting you. Like you are the mother. I would never disrespect that. But I also knew well enough to say, hey, there's great careers here. And there is a huge potential to own your own business and do all these things. And I'm not saying college is for you or isn't for you. I'm just saying, let's just talk about what the options are. I'm just here to be a resource and help people on their journey. If I can do that, great. My wife is a physician. You obviously have to go to college. And I'm glad that she did, because she's going to have to learn a ridiculous amount of schooling, engineering. It's just, there's so many people that don't want to go that and don't think they have an option. And like anything, if you take away somebody's hope, and if you take away their options, it's really crippling. How much more passion? Like for me, I only care if someone's passionate. Honestly, the rest of it doesn't matter that much to me. I want you to be like pretty excited about it. And one of my favorite stories is a framer I had named Johnny. And he, like a lot of them, he loved hunting and fishing and all the stereotypes of a normal framer. But what I loved about it is after every day, he would take a picture of what he did, and he would text me, the owner of the company. I was a young kid at the time. I was in the 20s. And he would send me a picture and he goes, how awesome is this? He was so proud of what he did. And there's very few industries where you can look back on a day's work, a week's work, and visually see what you've done. I'm not saying it's the only one, but there's a huge amount of validation and accomplishment when you can do that. And I love hearing people's stories when they talk about that.
Well, yeah. So a couple things. There's a lot to unpack there, and I love this. So I call what you're saying, I call it the stand back moment. I was on a landscaping crew, and we landscaped $1 million houses back in the 80s. So these were some big houses. These are big projects. And we used to, at the end of the day, we'd stand back on our shovel and we'd drink our pop or our beer or whatever we had. And we would literally look at what we did and say, look at that. How freaking beautiful is that? We built stone pathways and pine trees and hills and ponds and all this kind of stuff. And it was amazing. And that is why they say that 65% of blue collar workers are happy with their jobs versus 35% of white collar workers.
Can you repeat that stat one more time?
The stat was 65% of blue collar workers are happy with their jobs versus 35% of white collar workers.
Wow.
And the reason they say that is because when you get right down to it, there's that control factor. Okay, there's that control factor that a blue collar worker has that a white collar worker doesn't necessarily have the same. Now, having said that, there are people that want to work in corporations because it's very secure, or at least they believe that it is. And there's lots of people in a big building that they drive to every day, and that's fine. I'm not knocking that at all. I'm just saying it's my job as a blue collar entrepreneur, okay, to present the options that are out there for everyone to see. I was at a party many years ago, and I couldn't believe this. There was a bunch of gals there. My son is going to Ohio State. Oh, my son's going to Notre Dame. My son's going to wherever, UPenn or wherever they were going. And the one gal said, well, what happened to what's her name's son? What's he doing? Oh, well, he's just going to be a plumber. And I'm like, okay, I know who that plumber is. And he's now got 6 vans, 12 employees, and he's freaking killing it. Okay. And that never even occurred to them. Is it the title or the degree that's important, or is living well important? Is having a self-sufficient, financially motivated, problem solving, isn't that the goal, or is it just a degree on their wall? When you say to someone, you're going to college because you need to get an education, can you please draw what that means? Here's a piece of paper and a crayon. Can you draw education and tell me exactly what you mean by that? Because I'm not even sure you know what you mean when you say that. I'm not an anti-college guy, like you said. If you're going to operate on my shoulders so I can get back on the golf course, I need you to know everything there is to know about a knife before you come at me with it. Believe me, I get that. And I believe that school-specific, career-specific pathways are great. But when you're talking about it's for everybody, it can't possibly be for everybody, because some of us learn with our hands, some of us learn tactily, we all learn in different ways. And all I can say is, before you put your son or daughter through that path, at least think about, what is it you want your life to look like? Tell me what your nirvana is. Tell me what your comfort, peace, and freedom level is. Tell me what you want your car to look like, your house to look like, your vacations to look like, your sport, your hobby, your give back moment, your charity, your pet. Is it a dog or a cat? What color? What would you name it? Let's figure out what you want your life to look like first, and then find one of the many paths to getting there, because I get it. I am a parent myself. I wrote a letter to parents on my website, and I said, listen, I understand you birthed your child, you swaddled them, you kept them clean, you bathed them, you fed them, you sheltered them, protected them, you tried to teach them what you know. And now for some reason, when they turn 18, you think the only way you can walk this earth and say, I'm a good parent, is if they have an expensive degree on the wall. That's where the story goes south, because that's never been true in the history of our economy. Yeah, sure. If you're going to be a doctor, you're going to guarantee yourself some higher level. There's no doubt. And that's fine. But you can't say that white collar equals successful, blue collar equals unsuccessful. That's just not true. And you're actually harming your son or your daughter. And I have examples of this. If you put them into some bland business degree where now they have $100,000 in debt, and they come out and they end up being a carpenter anyway. You know what I mean? So you just got to be careful as you're parenting these kids that you aren't the one that is, it's not feeding your ego for their degree as much as it is their life. You need to figure out what's really important here.
There's a lot of places to go with this, but one is going back to that. And I appreciate the historical detail on that blue and white detail. I was listening to another builder friend of mine who was over in Switzerland recently, and they were talking about just the color of your shirt. Why do we have to determine what the color of it is? And
Correct.
this particular one was in Switzerland. And to be a master craftsman is a very respected trait. And a part of it is the industry over there is like, you can afford to live in your home. You can actually have a living wage, support your family, being a carpenter, being a painter, and it's very respected. There's no shame in it. So I think words matter, education matters, the stigma of it matters. And I think this is a cultural thing, right? We're talking about it, but honestly, this
Right.
is going to be years, decades, generations possibly to change some of this culture. If our culture even wants to change it, who knows? That'll
Yeah.
be probably for sure beyond you, maybe beyond me too. Hard to know how long this is going to take or at all. But we're certainly not the first country or period of time where this was a thing. Like it used to be, right? Back in the old days, like if you were tan, that meant you were a field worker. And if you were, let's say your skin was white, if you were lighter in color, like you wore the hats, they wanted to protect themselves because the whiter you were, the wealthier you were, or even like gout, they called it the rich man's disease. Like the fatter you were, the more prosperous. Our history, the humankind, this is not a United States problem. This is a human problem where I don't know that much about it, but like the caste system in India, you've got all these different layers of,
Right.
it's just really interesting. As somebody that doesn't really care about any of those things, like you're a person, like I value you as a person. And can we just go back to like just normal, or can we just be humans and get out of our own way? And we all have biases. I'm sure I have biases. I think that's the thing. We have to talk about it. You have to name it. What do they say? You have to name it to tame it. And if you don't talk about it, how are you ever supposed to educate it? In fact, I won't go super political on the podcast because that's not the point. But like the other day, something came up in the paper. My daughter's 9. She's sharp as a whip. She'd be an amazing owner. I actually have had her do a few kids podcasts. I had her over break interview other builders' kids as a 9-year-old. It was just
Oh,
hilarious
nice.
to have them talk. But anyway, I was explaining to her some history stuff that's a little controversial, but I'm like, I told her name is May. I said, May, I will never not tell you the truth because this has happened in history. And if we don't talk about it, and this is a very dark time in history, it was terrible what happened. But for me to shelter that from you as a parent, this is my own personal belief that people can do what they want with their own children. But for me,
Sure.
I was like, May, I'm just going to tell you what it is, and I'll help you understand what happened and how we can avoid it in the future. But the reason I'm bringing it up is we all have these teaching moments. They don't even have to be your children. It can be anybody. And maybe it's the parent kicking you across the table and you standing up and say, you know what, you could, again, becomes a
Well,
little controversial
yeah.
because it's her son, but like just being open about it. There's so many possibilities. What do you want their future to be, and what do you want your future to be?
A couple things there. So when you put your feet on the floor in the morning, by the time you hit the floor and get to your home office, school, church, whatever, you're crossing 10,000 very viable, very financially sound blue collar jobs that are still out around today. It's not gone. This is still a huge industry. And the other thing that people don't understand is that the sewers came from Germany, people who make clothes, cabinet makers came from there. The stonemasons came from Eastern Europe. They came from Scotland and Ireland. The carpenters came from Germany as well. The farmers, they all immigrated to this country from other parts of the world. But even back in the day, the tailors that made suits, okay, in Manhattan, they might have been looked down upon because they had a needle and thread in their hand. Those people made a killing even back then. They were out paying cash for houses, and it's funny because someone asked me the other day, how come I never knew this? How come I'm being told I got to put my 4 kids through school? I didn't know that I was making a $400,000 decision. And this is after I told him, I said, look at base construction jobs right now where you can learn something now and then run your own company later. They're paying $30 an hour. That's 75 grand after overtime and everything. And after 3 years, that's 300,000 to your plus side of your asset base. You go to school, you're spending 40, 50 a year. That could be 200,000 to the negative side. So what you don't understand is you're making a $400,000 decision right now for your child. And that's a very real economic situation. And they're like, how come I never knew this. I didn't know that. I just found out that my neighbor over here owns an HVAC company. He's got this big, gorgeous house and he's got these cars and he lives a great life and goes on vacations. And I'm like, because nobody ever asks us. Okay. Everyone wants to interview the highly educated people. You got East Coast of the United States interviewing West Coast of the United States and no one in between. No one ever asks us how good we're doing. No one ever asks us why we like what we do. No one ever asks us, you didn't go to college, really?
And the funny part is, and this is going back to your pipe fitter interview, for those that haven't listened to it, it's definitely worth a
Bowen.
listen. Yeah, he has a super interesting story. But when the power goes out, people pay attention. When your internet goes out, people pay attention. When your phones don't work, people pay attention. One of the most basic amenities of all is sewer and water. I guarantee if your sewer stops working, what do you do? And obviously, a lot of this, I assume, like what happened in Asheville, South Carolina, and like some of the stuff, the hurricanes, things like major
Yeah.
outages, depending on where you live, like you get reminded of just, whoa, there obviously there's your life at the fires in LA and all those types of things, but on a not so dramatic level, but on an even more basic level, like in Minnesota, it was negative 25. I didn't hear about any power outages or things freezing, but sure shooting somebody had some pipes freeze for sure. And so my point is, you don't really realize that the layers of whether it's pipes or sophistication, it's just not layers of government, but layers of services that you depend on, that you expect to be normal, that when they're removed from you, when there's a phone outage now, and there was one earlier last summer where I think our phones didn't work for half a day. And being an entrepreneur, obviously you want your phone, you want to be able to call people, you got to do jobs, whatever. But that's a pretty minor thing. But what if it went out for a week? Or a month or a year?
Like the most popular guy in North Carolina right now is the guy with the end loader and a dumpster. Okay. And he is making an absolute fortune. I live part-time in Naples, Florida in the wintertime. Okay. And I've been going there since I was a kid. I've been going there for 45 years. Never experienced a hurricane ever. Mild ones, maybe. Thunderstorms, yeah, but not major hurricanes. And we had two in the last, 4 or 5 years down there. So there were 10,000 elevators that were broken in Naples, Florida.
10,000?
10,000 in that area, in Collier County, in that area. What people didn't know was, let's just call an elevator repair company and have them come out and fix it, right? Okay. Elevator repair guy comes out, and he might be from Wisconsin, right? Because they're bringing people in. These elevator repair guys are making 150, 180 grand a year. I guarantee you quiz or query anyone living in that building, they're probably thinking he's making 50 grand. Okay. These are people, these are the hidden gems out there. These are things that go on in this world that people just don't understand. They don't know about. And again, it's because they don't ask us. But I can tell you, we go home every night and we just smile and we wave at those people that are driving down the road and doing what they're doing. And it's an interesting thing because it's not like I'm going to go out and trumpet how much money I make. That's not the point. The point is I'm trying to get with parents and say, before you make this decision, like the kid, I had a car one time that they had to tear the whole dashboard out. It was a recall kind of thing. So they were going to take my car for 3 weeks. I had to get a replacement car. So I went to this rental place right down the street here. And the kid comes out from behind the counter. He's got a 3-piece suit on. I think each piece was from a different suit, but he was doing it. He was cool. And he had his his name tag and everything. And we had to wait a half an hour for this car. And this kid was down. And so I just started talking to him, what's going on? And I told him about what I was doing with the project and everything. And he goes, I told my parents I wanted to be a carpenter and they pushed me to go to school. Now I have 80,000 in debt. And here I am making 28.5 a year trying to work down that debt at this car rental place. I got a business degree. I can't make it, whatever. And I said, you need to leave this job right now and go become a carpenter because you're never going to get out of this. You're right. You got sold down the river a little bit, and I understand that. But you got to get out and make a change. And I've had so many people, Mark, since I started this book and this course, call me and thank me or email me, write to me and thank me and say, I was 48 years old. I was in this cubicle and I'm selling this medical supply thing and I hated my life. And I read your book and I'm like, screw this. I'm going back. I was a plumber's assistant when I went through college and I loved it. I'm going back. I became a plumber and I love my life now. Thank you so much. And it's just interesting how that pendulum shifted so far one way. And I'm pushing as hard as I can to shift it back to the middle because that's where it belongs.
Yeah, you're not alone. And we're locally here in Minnesota, our building industry, Housing First is awesome at this, but they've actually created a speakers bureau and where we can go speak to high schools, colleges, and it's been on a more local level. And so we'll just see what happens. I think I'm going to do my first one here this spring.
Nice.
So we'll see how the kids interact. But I actually you can sense the entrepreneurial spirit being one. I'm not going to say you have it or you don't, but there's certain people that when you interact with them, you're like, wow, okay, this is different. That's no different than I make it a Michael Jordan. Someone once told me, I think they called it a one touch, not a one touch wonder. It was a one possession talent. And they were talking about when Michael Jordan famously got cut, but then the next year he was at an All-American camp, but no one knew who he was. Everyone was talking about all the other ones. And he took the ball one time, went up the court, and every single scout in the gym, not granted it's Michael Jordan, but everyone knew one touch. This kid's different. And where I'm going with this is you can interact. I think teachers see it all the time. Like you can just tell, man, there's something different about this kid and their mindset, their whatever it is. It's just sometimes you can't even name what it is. You're like, they're just going places. And where I'm bringing this up is like, where are those places go? How can a guidance counselor, how can they help? It's funny. I'm thinking about my guidance counselor right now. I'm trying to think of what she told me. Mrs. Huff, I played tennis with her son. I'll have to think about what she actually told me. I can't think of it right now, but just giving people good advice. And I think talking about it, sharing it. And anyway, a couple weeks ago before your episode will air, Brody Cheetah, he's a 17-year-old kid, reached out to me, totally not in construction at all. I'm like, he's a 17-year-old kid who reached out to me that wants to be on the podcast because he wants to talk about running a business in high school. I'm like, bring him on. This kid sounds amazing. Right. And it was so sobering. He has a t-shirt business in school. And he talked about how half the teachers were supporting him and half of the teachers were suppressing him. It was really kind of interesting. And I don't know if they felt their careers were threatened or what they necessarily, it came out a little bit in the interview, but it was interesting. One teacher was helpful to him that she helped him. She paid her own money, but she used school facilities to like printers and whatnot to help him create some posters for whatever. And once the school found out about it, even though she paid it out of it so that I can get if the school's paying for it, although I would argue that I'd be fine with that personally, they shut it down with basically the mentality of if we do it for him, we have to do it for everyone. Kind of honestly, it's a communist mindset. Come on, we got to stop this.
Yeah, there's no doubt.
There's no doubt.
They're pushing college on everyone.
Oh, why? And so anyway, the kid is good. I'm not going to let that stop me. And I was just so impressed at his demeanor. I was like, I was nowhere near that mature at 17 and just seeing. And so I wanted to get his story on there and I hope it inspires other people because you can actually start this a lot younger. Honestly, this goes back to anytime I see a kid selling lemonade, like even if I'm not thirsty, I pull over and give him a couple bucks because I do this.
I do the same exact thing. Even if and many times I don't want the lemonade because I don't know how they made it. So I just give them money anyway, but I like the entrepreneurial part of it. It's interesting because if you go to some of these high schools, and somehow my high school turned into a college prep school, it didn't change any curriculum at all. It didn't change the way it looks or the way it operates. It's the same school, but now it's got college prep words on it. Okay, what does that even mean? But how that harms kids is if my dad's a carpenter and I want to be a carpenter, I'm walking down these hallways and it's all college prep everywhere. Am I looked down upon because I'm not following that path? It begins to plant that idea in someone's mind at a very young age. And then you have these boards, right? And the board says, oh, Susie's going to wherever, MIT, or this one's going to Ohio State, or this one got a scholarship to go to here or there, or Michigan, whatever. Okay. There's not a board over here that says your friend.
Brody. Yeah.
There's not a board that says he started a t-shirt company. There's not a board that said this guy's going to follow in his footsteps and take over his father's plumbing company. There's not a board that says this guy's going to go become a carpenter and he's going to build houses. There's not a board for that. And I think that's really sad because you're only celebrating what a finite group of people are accomplishing. You're not celebrating the rest of these human beings.
Lake Society magazine is Minneapolis' premier target market boutique lifestyle and design publication. It embodies the unique lifestyles and design of the Minneapolis City Lakes neighborhoods. From Lake of the Isles to Lake Harriet, it showcases the best in local design projects by both premier builders, architects, and interior designers in this area. Lake Society magazine has the look and feel of a national publication with glossy covers, high-end finishes. It's mailed directly to upper bracket single-family homeowners in the City Lakes area. And it's the perfect local coffee tabletop publication. Subscriptions can also be available through the website lakesocietymagazine.com. Additionally, Publisher and founder Karen Steckel has over 27 years in the local magazine publishing industry and has a passion for high-end photography and quality graphics. Her commitment to quality, visual simplicity, and beauty are strongly reflected in her beautiful Lake Society magazine.
I was on Fox News one time, and they were talking about paying off all these college loans. And they asked me what I thought about it. And I said, well, if you make a bad decision and you go out and get a degree that you can't use, that's nobody's fault but your own. Okay. You live in this romantic world of, oh, I'm going to study Eastern European language translation and you can't sell that anywhere. That's on you. Just like it would be for me. If I started a surfboard repair shop in Ohio, that would be a bad decision. I wouldn't expect you to bail me out. Okay. So my thinking is, if you're going to bail out kids who paid money for college, then are you also going to bail out the guy or pay for the guy to start his own plumbing business by buying him a truck and giving him some tools? Because it's the same thing. It's 1-to-1.
What's funny about that, because I'm in the Midwest too, although actually there's an active surf scene on the North Shore at Lake Superior. I don't know if you've ever seen these guys. They pretty much the best surf is in the winter. So like January through March, it's -25. These guys are out surfing. They've got these giant ice beards. They're wearing 2 suits, but like maybe a surf shop in Duluth, Minnesota, you could reinvent it. I don't know what's happening in Toledo if you got lakes with.
We don't have any surf in Lake Erie. That's
anyway,
for sure.
It's pretty funny. One of the questions here before we'll modify here at the end is, you mentioned coursework. I was looking on your website. You obviously have the book. I assume the book is the feeder to the courses, or is the course a feeder to the book? Walk me through these 8 platforms. I didn't have enough to dive into each one, and tell me a little bit about how this evolved. It started with this letter to your daughter, which obviously has gone way, and I'd love to hear her perspective on this at some point through you. But walk us through. So the book comes out. At what point was the coursework kind of a manifestation after the book? Like, when did that start happening? Hey, I got to give people training steps to use this to actually help them on their way.
That's a great question. So your podcast I'm doing right now is number 285 that I've done in the past 3 years. And I had seen a lot of podcasters with a lot of books behind them. A lot of times they'll put the books on shelves behind them. And it got me thinking, do I want my book buried in one of those 1,000 books that's on his shelf or her shelf? And I thought, the answer is no. I don't want my book to become shelf help. I really want it to be self-help, right? So
that's a good one.
I heard that once, so I stole it. So for me, it was like, I asked people, pick a book, tell me what you learned from it. And they're like, yeah, that was a great book. I read that. How did it apply to your life? I don't know, but it was a good book. I just read it. So I got miffed by that. And I thought, I want to force people to be better. I want to force people to design their life today, this afternoon. I want to force people to think about their future better. I want to force people to take control of their future. And I know you hear that a lot, but this is my gig. My business was very successful, and I'm very blessed and grateful for that. I'm not doing this to make money. I donate the money from my course sales anyway. But I wanted people to take my book, and you don't even need to read it. You could start the course and reference the book, or you can read the book and then go do the course. But it really changes how you see your future, like now, today, this afternoon. And so it's 8 sessions. They're 45-minute sessions apiece. You get to hear me talk for 3 or 4 minutes, and then you're off doing the task assigned. But it's really designed to clear your head, start from scratch, hit the reset button and say, okay, I'm going to live for me. These are my choices. Me and only me knows how I want to live. No one else can tell me that. No one else could even guess. So it starts off with me figuring out what that looks like and then finding one of the many ways to get there. And it's literally $179. It's not one of those $2,000 or $3,000 courses. You get a book with that, and then you take it, and then you can connect with me, and I'll ask you how you did, and I'll talk to you about your future. I even have some places you can go to college for 6 months and get into these jobs that are paying 70, 80, 90, 100,000 a year. I have some students in there right now. They're these micro colleges. So I try to take you from A to Z and make that happen. And again, you can find it at kenrusk.com. And the cool thing is, if you decide to help yourself, just know you're going to be helping somebody else in the process. So it's a pretty cool thing.
How does you had mentioned I guess I'll go there in a minute about the pipe fitter because it keeps coming back to me, some of the wages. In the book, do you talk about, I guess we'll talk about it now. In the book, do you talk about wage expectations? Because a big part of it is just naming it. For instance, I think that gentleman was making, I think he was $45 an hour, but then when the pipe goes out and the government says, hey, we need power or we need the plumbing, or we need it now and we have 10 days to do it, they're being paid $85 an hour. Well, $85 an hour, I Googled it while I was working out this morning. That's $166,000 salary. Now, he's not making that all the time. I mean, he's making six figures for sure. And the thing that people don't talk about, because money is important, but honestly, if you look at the reasons why people stay in a company, money's usually like fourth or fifth in the list. It's usually like culture, like lifestyle. Do they feel appreciation is usually number one. Validation. That's something as owners like myself, I need to do a better job of. We're so busy on the next thing or what we're doing or running the business, but we need to do a really good job in the leadership role of validating our people and inspiring the entrepreneurs, which I want to talk to you about at the end of this podcast. But where I'm going with this is, and I lost my train of thought on that one, but
yeah, we do talk a lot about dollars and cents in the book. And I will tell you, your stat is correct that money is usually fourth. However, most people aren't necessarily telling the truth there, because even if you feel really appreciated and you're making 25 grand a year, you're going to change jobs.
Right.
But it is something, the way I see it is this: if I can create the life that I want with and through this company, that's when I stay, regardless of where the money's at. If I can say to myself, my boss cares about my future as much as I do, he's supporting me in getting to that future, and I'm in control of if I can in fact get that future, that's where people really tend to stay. And that's where you feel the appreciation. That's where you feel the culture. That's where you feel the inclusion. And then the money is there. Money is like, it really shouldn't even be on that list, because it's like an underlying current of all those things, because you do need to support yourself to live. But whatever money you make, you need to figure out a way to spend it in the best way possible to make your life the way you want it. And that's where you end up staying and being loyal in those jobs.
Yeah. Wow. There's a lot there. How, as we go into the end, you had mentioned it before, and I just think it's really interesting line of thinking. I'd actually never heard the word. I know what it is now after listening to it, but why don't you tell my audience anyway, a little bit about that? We know what entrepreneur is and they're celebrated, but the entrepreneur is interesting because I've got for sure one on my team and I know plenty more. Explain a little bit about that for those that are listening that aren't familiar with that term.
So there are people that once they decide they can work within your framework, they may not want to go out and take the risks that I've taken. I own 40 dump trucks. Okay. I have the workers' comp, and I have all the issues that I have to deal with. I have the banking and the payrolls and the risk and all the insurances and all that stuff. There are people that have grown with me and said, you know what? You let me be autonomous right now. So I am an entrepreneur within your framework. I'm an intrapreneur. So you let me control my space. You let me control the budgets. You let me control the hiring and the firing. You let me control the efficacy and the result. And you let me control my income by getting bonuses based on what I do. So I own my own company within your company, in a sense. And your goal as an entrepreneur, and this is where I always get the pushback until they listen for a minute. Your goal as an entrepreneur is to become as irrelevant to your company as possible, as quickly as possible. And the only way to do that is to replace yourself on the tasks that you had. Because if you are a true entrepreneur, you need to be up in the air at 50,000 feet, looking 5, 10, 15 miles out, seeing what's coming at you. Okay. And so for me, a lot of entrepreneurs will say, wait a minute, I started this company and I fix this, I repair that, I tell these people, I yell at them, I motivate this, I build that. Yeah, I get all that. But if you're really interested in like dynamic growth and growth beyond your expectations, then you need to lean on the people within your company and raise them up and share part of that growth with them. It's funny because I learned this 20 years ago when I was still working in this company, and I had a group of people that I wanted to surround myself with. I brought them into the conference room and I said, I want you each to take this piece of paper and this pencil. I want you to write down how many more millions in revenue we can do next year based on what you think is possible. Okay. And so just write it down and keep it to yourself. I collected all their pieces of paper, and don't you know, Mark, that all of their numbers were $1 to $2 million higher than mine was? Okay. So be careful that you're not your own self limiter. I didn't even tell him what my number was. But what I said was, as you're thinking about this, know that I'm going to share the difference between now and that number with you all if we hit that, which means I was giving them money I didn't even have yet. So it was no expense to me whatsoever. It was found money. And what you know, we've been doing that every year, and we've been hitting these new higher numbers. And just be careful that you're not your own self limiter, because once these people understand, you mean I can work within your framework, I can make decisions, I can be at the financial benefit of those decisions when they work, and you're going to let me have the autonomy to do that? Absolutely. Then, okay, Ken, get out of my way. Let me go do it.
That's a little bit, you mentioned just came back to me right now. You were talking about when you were digging ditches and working the jackhammer. I was very young, but I was a tall kid and a big kid. And I remember they let me, and they should not have let me use the jackhammer, but I was so excited to just destroy the concrete. The thing was definitely bouncing me off the ground. But my point is, it's like the enthusiasm where sometimes you give someone some latitude, or you give them the opportunity to do something, and maybe they're not ready for it. That's okay. And I think as leaders, it's taken me, I've been building for 20 years now, but I think it's taken me a while to realize that, like someone said, if you can replace your skill set to like within 60% of efficiency, like you hire that person immediately. Now they can't stay at 60%. They have to keep growing. But the idea is, like, for one thing, bottlenecks. If you are the bottleneck, most owners are the bottleneck. I am the bottleneck of my company. I know that. It's only been the last couple of years that I realized. For a long time, I always wanted to balance. I always looked at people the wrong way. And it wasn't that I love people, but the idea was like more people, more problems, more things to manage, which is partially true. But every time I hired someone, my stress went down because they took stuff. And it's like, why has it taken me so long to realize that? And now scaling is something I'm interested in, not because I want to grow. I want to scale because I want to get my time back. And as I have 3 small children, I have 100 hobbies. Like, I want to do those things. I've never really worked a day in my life because I love what I do. I don't find that difficult, but it doesn't mean it's not stressful. It doesn't mean that there's not more opportunities for me to scale and grow. And then the other thing that's super sobering for most business owners is the line of, if you walk out the door for a month, will your business operate? Or 2 months or 6 months or a year? And I don't know the number, but I would say, let's say 90%, maybe more. The answer would be no. That means you have a job. You don't have a business. And one of my, God willing, if I live another 20 years, because I got to at least work till my kids are done with school, and to see if they want to stick around or do whatever. But I would like to build my business now in a way that it can operate without me. And then my personal favorite place to be is that 50,000 foot. I love idea generation. I love the creativity. I love seeing the team do things. I'm like, that's a great idea. Continue on. This is great. Keep going. That's something that I'm very now awake to, where I wish someone had told me about that when I was younger. Maybe it's a maturity thing. Maybe it's a me thing. Hard to know. You find yourself where you're at, and you got to, okay, what's next?
You're either working on your business or your business is working on you. You're either working in it or it's working you. And I've always said, we don't live to work. We work so that we can live. And I want to know what the live part is first. Okay. I want to know what you look like on the 8 hours that I know you're not sleeping, or I know you're not working. What do those 8 hours look like? What's your life? I need to support you in developing that. Because you get these people that they come home and they're like, yeah, I worked 80 hours this week, and I'm like overweight. I have diabetes and high blood pressure. I can't remember my kids' first names. I don't know what sports they play in. I haven't taken my wife out on a date in months, but look at me go. I worked 80 hours. I'm like, good on you, man. You keep that going. Okay, well done. No, I realized early on that I didn't want that. I wanted to bring people along with me, find ways to afford them through growth, and then have a life. The whole reason you start a business, your own company, is so that you can run things and you can do what you want to do with your life. You don't start a business so that you can become a prisoner to it. That's for sure.
I mean, amen. I 100%. I talk a lot about that. We won't repeat everything I always talk about on this particular one, but the wealth and wellness space is something I'm very passionate about. To what you're talking about, there are, and I think this is a bit of it is a cultural and education thing. And it does speak to the perception of blue collar, white collar, and some of that. I'm not intelligent enough to speak about it that eloquently, but essentially it's in our psyche in different areas where, maybe the person who's saying, hey, I work 80 hours a week, that's their way of finding validation in the sense like, hey, I'm doing what I'm supposed to do, but they've devalued their own time, they've devalued their
We are.
life. And
What
I
we
don't
do.
mean to put a big observation on this person. I'm only viewing it from my eyes. And like life can be, I'm not saying you don't work hard, but is quantity more important or is quality more important? Again, everyone has to make their own choice. It's their life. To your point before, you're opening the surf shop in Toledo. If it goes out of business, it's on you. Like, you have one life to live. What are you going to do with it? And everyone, whether it's the birth of your children, whether it's your spouse holding you accountable, whatever it might be, I'm thankful for those little wake up calls. Maybe it's a funeral. Maybe it's someone selling their business. I think the lessons come in so many different ways. And you wake up, it's a health scare. You've got diabetes, you've got whatever. I think just talking about it again, I think is super healthy. And I think being vulnerable and having people like yourself that write books, that care enough to try to put it out there. I suspect you do a lot of public speaking as well.
Yeah, we do. We're actually doing a couple speeches up in your neck of the woods. We're doing North Dakota, Bismarck, North Dakota in 2 weeks. We're doing a couple of them up there. And yeah, I mean, I think it's incumbent upon people that have been successful. The harder you work, the luckier you get. We all know that. Luck is labor under correct knowledge. We all know all those those idioms or whatever they call them. But in my mind, if you've become successful, it's your turn. It's incumbent upon you to turn around and help the next entrepreneur come up the ropes and maybe cut his or her learning curve a little bit. And that's what I'm doing with the book and with the course. I've had so many people tell me that their lives have been changed and their businesses have changed. They've reclaimed their time. They're going out to play golf with their kids, or they're doing things with their spouse, or even just refueling, planting flowers in the yard on the weekends. And it's just a really gratifying thing for me because I know that what I've done has worked. I know that these simple things, these plug and play things that I talk about in the book work. The course is something that really changes the way people look at their future. And so, yeah, it's one really great product that I think I've built, and it's just my way of giving back to
I love
people
that.
trying to make it happen.
I heard something recently. It's been a while since I've mentioned it again, but it's you go through 3 phases in your career: learn, earn, and return. And I joke that I missed the earning phase. I'm in learning and returning, but I need to go back and get to second base again. But my question for you is the book, and I'm thinking the coursework, like for myself, and I know you don't know me, but for instance, someone who has been an entrepreneur for 20 years, so I've done something right, could have done a lot better. Would there be, I'm going to read the book for sure, mainly because I want to talk about it and give it away to guests and things like that. But would the course still be beneficial to somebody like myself? Is it for everyone? Does it help more young people? Does it help people that are maybe already in the trades that are aspiring to own their own business? What kind of value would existing entrepreneurs get out of it? Or is it just like...
I'll tell you a story. First off, the entrepreneurship is critical. That the part of developing entrepreneurs, that's absolutely critical for regaining your life back. Okay. But I'll tell you a story. So the editor that I worked on with the book, she helped me just rearrange the chapters and clean some things up, and which was nice because they kept almost all the book and they only added about 10% in research I had to do. But one of the things that she learned, and she said to me, she goes, when I read this chapter on the Today Club versus the Someday Club, she goes, I went home immediately and sat my family down and said, we're planning the Yellowstone vacation tonight. And they literally sat down, they rented the Winnebago, they got the plane tickets, they got everything needed. And they went and they planned that vacation for 6 months from where they were at that moment in time. And she was out there driving around the mountains, and she called me and she said, Ken, I can't believe that I am a very well-read, I'm published, I'm an editor, I'm a Manhattanite, I'm all these things where I think I knew it all. And yet, if I wouldn't have read that chapter, we'd have never gone to Yellowstone. We'd have thought about it, we'd have dreamed about it, wished and hoped, but we would have never actually done it. And she goes, and the cool thing is we're out here in Yellowstone and we're planning our vacation to Scotland to go see our extended family next year already. And she said, and I owe all that to you. And I'm almost embarrassed to tell you that because here I am coaching you on this book and you've given me this gift of simplicity, but of actually doing something. And so, yeah, I think the answer is you could probably read this book and go home tonight and say, all right, hon, that thing we've always wanted to do, we're planning it right now. It may not happen for 1 year, 2 years, or 3 years. We're going to plan it right now and just anticipate and have the joy of watching it.
I'll tell you what, I'll commit to going through it, mainly because it's a little bit like basics, or I guess I can't give it as high praise as the Bible, but I know the Bible, I read the Bible. It doesn't mean there's not value in reading it again and again, because basic principles, you're at different phases of your life. When I was single or before I was married, this thing might mean something to me. As I'm raising 3 small children and owning a business, it means something to me now. It might mean something different to me in 10 years now. I sure hope it does. And so I think that's where I was getting at. So I'm actually excited. We'll actually have to bring you back on a year from now or something like that. Just go through it and we'll pick a different topic, but basically an entrepreneur, going back to the school of hard knocks, if you will, this air quote.
But by then I'm halfway through my second book, which is going to be cool. So by
do you know what it's called?
We have a couple of working titles. One of them is Cool Boss, which is how to be one, how to find one, or change the one you have. And that's really about, since this first book was slated towards the individual, this book is more slated towards the corporate culture.
Yeah.
And
That's
I'm excited for that one to
Oh,
come out. They've been begging me to write it because they said, you've talked to those people, now talk to us. And so I'm looking forward to having that one come out as well.
That's great. Appreciate your time. Want to make sure, respect it. I will have everything in the show notes, and everyone can, what is it? KenRusk.com. Is that the best?
Yep. KenRusk.com.
Then we'll have it. I appreciate your time coming on the podcast. And wow, we could talk to you I could do a mini series of talking to you on this. It's been a blast. Appreciate your time. And thanks again for coming on the Curious Builder podcast.
Thanks, I really appreciate it. Thank you.
We're excited to announce that the Curious Builder collectives are going into 3 other states. For those not familiar with what the collective is, it lives between what the Contractor Coalition is and a Builder 20 group. What we do in each state is we have a group of 25 to 30 builders that get in a room, and you break up into groups of 9. You spend 45 minutes talking about a set topic, whether it's branding, marketing, contracts, whatever that set topic is for that day. And then you talk for 45 minutes, you get up, you mix up the groups, and you do it again, and you're out of there. You'll be out in under 3 hours. We're going to be going to Phoenix, Arizona. Brad Levitt is going to be leading a Curious Collective in Phoenix, Arizona. We are going to San Antonio. We've got David and Angela Penske from Penske Homes leading a group down there. And we have Brad Robinson and Vince Longo in Atlanta, Georgia, also leading a collective, as well as obviously me in Minnesota as well for our second annual collective. So if you're interested in collaborating with other builders, if you really want to dive deep on your business in a person-to-person relationship, ask a lot of questions, the collectives are for you. We also have in Minnesota an Interior Design Collective, as well as the Architect Collective. Check out the events page at thecuriousbuilderpodcast.com. Thanks for tuning in to the Curious Builder Podcast. If you like this episode, do us a favor, share it with 3 other business owners. The best way that we can spread what we're doing is by word of mouth, and with your help, we can continue to help other curious builders expand their business. Please share it with your friends, like and review online, and thanks again for tuning in.